Stachybotrys, maybe you've heard of it. This is the quote unquote black mold, which actually was negligible in the house that I'd left, was more than 10 times the normal in this new apartment. And what we noticed was an impact, a neurological impact on our brain.
Get to the Root of It goes underneath the surface into the hidden drivers of brain fog, cognitive decline, autoimmunity, and chronic illness. Because once you know the root cause, you can actually do something about it.
Your labs come back normal. You still don't feel right. So here's the thing. Normal isn't the same as optimal, and symptoms always have a reason.
Hosted by occupational therapist, functional medicine practitioner, and TEDx speaker Laurel Brennan.
This podcast is for the curious, the frustrated, and the people who refuse to accept "we don't know" as the final answer. Hello. So I am back for the second solo episode of our third season of Get to the Root of It. And in that first solo episode, I explained a little bit why I disappeared for a year and a half. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about that today, and hopefully you all can learn from my year. That was quite a tough one, and it can be helpful in one or many ways for you. So here we go. All right, so I took a big pause on Get to the Root of It because I was at capacity and something had to give, and the podcast was one of those things that I pushed aside. I'm back with things to share, and the big story of the last year and a half is all around mold in the living environment. So first of all, it's important to maybe make friends with mold. Otherwise, me personally, I would just go completely crazy. So I understand that mold is a friend in many situations. We have evolved with mold. Mold helps decompose things that are outside. But ideally, we would like for that mold to mostly stay outside. And it becomes a problem for health when that mold is in our living environment. And what I have learned is that it's not necessarily a problem for everyone. So it can be quite confusing when there are multiple people in a house and some people have symptoms. Somebody else has a totally different set of symptoms. Somebody else has a different set of symptoms, and other people have no apparent reaction or health problems at all. Okay, so I'm going to break this down for you, and I'll share personal stories so it makes a little bit more sense maybe. Okay, so I became aware that mold could potentially be a health risk. Environmental toxins that are released from mold spores. They're called mycotoxins. They're teeny tiny. We don't see them. I became aware that they can be a problem for people, especially with people with autoimmune disease, which I have. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2006. So it was actually a Lyme specialist who brought that to the attention of both my daughter and I when we were getting treatment more than a decade ago, probably. And I'm going to share what I've learned over time so that maybe you don't have to go through the same growing pains. So my first learning was that mold can be a problem for people. If it's in your house and you're breathing it, it might impact your health. So the first person we came to inspect our house was not really an inspector. He had a business that sprayed some kind of something that supposedly, quote unquote, killed mold. He was hired to go into, remember those ball pit places where you used to take your little kids and they would jump in these balls, and who knows if anybody ever cleaned them. He went in and sprayed those balls. He also went in and to car dealerships and sprayed cars after they'd been flooded. So he said he has this product that kills mold, and he would be happy to come by my house and tell me if I had any mold. He came by. My first comment to him was, listen, when I first moved into this house, it had an odor, but it had been unoccupied for 4 years. So I assumed it was just because it closed up. But as you're in a space for a period of time, you get used to that odor. You can't smell it. But I would smell it again after I left for a week for a vacation and would come back. So that I mentioned that to him. He came in, he said, I don't smell anything. He looked around for about 2 minutes and said, I don't see any mold. Your house doesn't have mold. It's fine. That was his inspection. I was a little suspicious of that. So I did some more outreach and found a second inspector who was highly recommended. And that gentleman had his own mold story. So he was a little bit more rigorous in his inspection. His newborn baby, he and his young wife were living in an apartment, and his newborn baby was in and out of the hospital multiple times for all kinds of respiratory issues. And they found out that the landlord knowingly painted over black mold. So he, as an inspector, wanted to make sure that nothing like that happened to anybody else, because you couldn't see the mold in his apartment, but it was really hazardous for his baby. So he did a much more thorough inspection than the first guy, though he did entirely forget the attic, and we did have a roof leak while we were there. But he found a significant amount of mold in the HVAC system. So we were renting that house. We actually loved that house and wanted to buy it, but we went to the landlord and said, hey, there's a mold problem. They said, well, if you're getting sick from it, move out. So our symptoms were pretty vague, right? Hard to pinpoint that this is definitely caused by mold. So my symptoms were, sometimes I had tingling and numbness in my legs, but I had MS, right? That had been diagnosed. I also had sometimes some pretty significant anxiety, though in my head, I wasn't feeling anxious. I wasn't worried about something, but I felt like I couldn't get enough air. Like I knew intellectually that I was getting enough air. I could put on a pulse oximeter on my finger and see that I was in the high 90s. I was getting enough air, but I felt in my chest that I wasn't. And this anxiety was this sense, this feeling of anxiety was sometimes really hard to deal with. I can remember sometimes just physically running out of the house because I felt better when I left the house. My oldest son missed a lot of school because he had headaches and nausea, but I, at that time, kind of attributed it to staying up late and being tired and being a senior and having senioritis. My daughter, who was a middle schooler at the time, was really struggling with mood, some pretty significant depression and anxiety, and also some neurological stuff. But we were seeing a Lyme doctor. So I was thinking, well, maybe this tingling and numbness kind of thing is because of the Lyme. My youngest child, who was gestated and birthed in that house, had regular nosebleeds. And his pediatrician just said, the air is dry, put some Vaseline on a Q-tip, stick it up his nose, it should be fine. So nothing awful. Like my husband also had some headaches and nausea, but I thought, well, he doesn't really have a great diet. It's probably that. His sleep is disrupted. Maybe it's that. So we left that house and wanted to make sure we moved into a place that was going to support our healing. So we had the same inspection company come and look at the house we were about to move into. It's a different person, same company. He did a much quicker overlook in the house than the previous gentleman had done in the house we just moved out of. He did say, you know what, there's mold in your front loading washing machine. You can try to clean out that rubber gasket, but sometimes it's hard. But if you're washing your clothes in there, you're putting mold on your clothes. So you should address that. And then he found some other surface mold on a couple of like old doors that weren't even in use, but they were sort of stacked up in the basement to use in case we needed them. So we had some hardwood doors that were from an old house and an old sale. So I was moving back into my family home, my childhood home. And I was most worried about my daughter. So we had the inspection company do the most, what I thought was thorough inspection in this bedroom she was going to move into. And his suggestion was, well, why don't we do an air sampling right outside of her bedroom? So that would get, actually, it was in the hallway in the center of 3 bedrooms. So he did a 20-minute air sample. Results came back. All is good. You're fine. Go ahead and move into this house. So we did. My anxiety, that feeling of anxiety in my chest, disappeared very quickly within a week. So I thought, fantastic. We're in a safe, new healing space. But then over time, some new symptoms appeared. Also nothing that I would pinpoint, oh, this is because of mold, right? I started getting arthritis. I was in my mid to late 40s at that point, and I was getting tailbone pain. I was doing more sitting. So I thought that was the cause of it. Tried a whole bunch of things to try to alleviate it. Could not get it to go away. Went to the doctor about it just to get it checked. He said, nope, looks like arthritis. Put some arthritic cream on it. It didn't work. So I just learned to live with this pain in my tailbone. And then new pains appeared right in my finger, in my middle finger. You can see if you're on video that finger has started to turn. Like it's crooked, that last joint. That was something new. I did have a history of breaking that finger. I was about 22 in Taekwondo. I also did have a history of falling on my tailbone, and it was sore for probably at least 3 weeks in lacrosse in high school. Don't know if that was fractured, maybe. Then my big toe started hurting. I had a sprain from that. I had sprained that big toe from yoga later in life, like probably in my early 40s. So I had all these new places of pain. Not consistent, not awful, easy to live with, but just of note. So I'm going to keep going down this symptom list. And you're going to think, how is this possibly connected to mold? Maybe you'll think that. Maybe you'll relate and think, oh my gosh, this is validating. I've had the same symptoms. Okay. So my youngest son, those nosebleeds continued, but then he started getting more symptoms. My daughter went away to college, felt better when she went away, felt worse when she came back. So my youngest, in addition to the nosebleeds that continued, he started getting kind of lightheaded, right? When he would go from change position, sitting to standing. That didn't seem out of the norm for me because when I was a kid, that happened to me all the time too. I thought that that's, just your blood pressure adjusting, but didn't know that that's at that point, when I was a kid, I didn't know that that was not necessarily normal. And so we actually went to go get that investigated, not just because he was getting sometimes dizzy when he stood up. He'd never passed out, but also because now his siblings thought he was just playing for this one, right? He couldn't stand at the sink and wash dishes. So his siblings assumed he's just trying to get out of chores. He said that when he stood, his feet would tingle and itch and swell and turn red. And I witnessed it more than once, so I believed him. And He had to like march in place or jump up and down. His circulation was not adequate. So we went to the doctor for him, a rheumatologist, because he had some concerning symptoms. We wanted to rule out any autoimmune disease. She said, nope, blood work is fine, referred him to a cardiologist who found an AV block. So this is a trouble with the electrical system in the heart. So he's being followed. He gets checked first it was every 3 months, then it was every 6 months. Now it's every year. He has very large veins that are always protruding. He got a growth under his eyelid that then bled. So it looked like he was crying blood. Like weird, random stuff, right? Somewhere along this line, while I was kind of noting this ever-growing list of symptoms, I took a functional medicine training that then led to a cognitive health training through Apollo Health. And on one of the last modules of my Apollo Health training, I learned about inhalational Alzheimer's, or cognitive decline caused by breathing in mycotoxins and mold spores from a water-damaged home. And this hit home because I had lost my mom to dementia, and I was concerned about mold from the house we already left, and now maybe mold in the house that we're in. So we did an ERMI. So we went through the dust test, because it was Brian Carr, who's one of the founders of the dust test, who did that module, that training that I took through Apollo Health. I called him up. I said, I'm starting a podcast. I need you to come on. I think he was early on, maybe episode 9. So go back and listen to that if you want to hear my learning, like right there. I remember saying to him that I can smell mold. I said it more than once. I smelled it in my old house. I can smell it if we go. I've been other spaces where immediately that damp smell, I'm like, oh, that's mold. And he had to stop me and say, hey, just so you know, mold doesn't always smell. So I learned that in the interview with Brian Carr. But then I also learned about the ERMI. I'm going to share a little bit about the ERMI in case this is something you want to pursue, so you can learn what's going on in your own house, in your own living space. It's not a crazy expensive test. It's also not a full inspection, but it's a good screening tool to see, is there an issue in my house? So the ERMI, ERMI, stands for Environmental Relative Moldiness Index. So it's a DNA-based test. So remember when we heard about PCR testing with the COVID test? This is a PCR test. It's looking at the DNA of the mold. And you do it with a dust cloth, like a Swiffer cloth, right? You put on gloves. You go collect dust throughout the home, you send it to the lab, you wait a few weeks, you get results back. So I did a dust test in the house that I was living in, and the results were not good. So that false sense of security that I had from the first guy who just did an air sample, I was now getting new information and learned from Brian Carr that air sample is not really a great test. And actually We Inspect, where Brian's a co-owner, they did an internal test, and they found that an air sampling done, I hope I'm getting this right, 4 feet from a wall that had mold behind it was 70% inaccurate. Don't 100% quote me on that. Go back and listen to his details, or I'll upload it, or I'll share it in the show notes. But it's something like that. right? About 70% of the air sampling tests right near a wall that had mold behind it showed that there was no mold. So it's not an accurate test. It tells you that it didn't suck up mold in this little space for this little amount of time. But mold lands on the dust and it falls. So collecting the dust and sending that away is a better assessment. So we did an ERMI, we did a dust test in our house, then we got a full inspection, and we're trying to decide whether we're going to remediate or move out. So my dad, it was his house. I'm one of 4 siblings. So somebody's going to buy the house or get the house, or we're going to split the house. And I was wondering, should it be me? Should I start remediation? And the advice from Brian was, this is not a good house for you. With my history of autoimmune disease and 2 or 3 out of 3 kids showing symptoms from being in the house, we decided it was better for us to look for another place to live. So now I'm up to why I stopped the podcast. So it's pretty stressful. Moving yet again, we looked for the newest, cleanest apartment that we could find because we were not ready to go into buying a house. We weren't even sure if we wanted to stay in the area. We just wanted a clean place to heal. So we moved into an apartment complex that was, quote unquote, luxury apartments. It was only been around less than 2 years, looked clean. I said to them, listen, I'm moving in here to heal. We had a whole conversation about mold. They assured me, but wouldn't sign any documentation that there was no mold there. Here's where it gets interesting. So I was celebrating being in this new clean space. We didn't bring our mattress. We brought an air mattress. We didn't bring any of our furniture. I bought washable rugs, just the dishes and silverware and clothes that we could wash because I was going to be in this new healing space. Day 3, the toilet basically exploded. Their response was to bring in a fan. And I knew now that that was not adequate. And so I pushed, and about a month later, they finally did bring in a remediation team that did a legitimate job, pulled up all the flooring, did a negative air pressure. They covered the bathroom with plastic, and I was eventually satisfied with their remediation process of that space because I'd pushed and pushed to get that to happen. But then I learned from other neighbors that this kind of thing has happened multiple times, and every other time they just used a fan, which is what they tried to do for me. So I went and got another dust test and ran it, and it was worse than the house that I just left. And you ask, well, could I tell? Could I physically tell? Were my symptoms different? And 100% yes. So in that PCR test, the DNA test of the mold, you get a breakdown. What molds are there? What's the quantity? Is it 10 times higher than normal? Is it 100 times higher than normal? Is it 1,000 times higher than normal? What molds? So Stachybotrys, maybe you've heard of it. This is the quote unquote black mold, which actually was negligible in the house that I'd left, was more than 10 times the normal in this new apartment. And what we noticed was an impact, a neurological impact on our brain. So my son was homeschooling. He was like 13 and talking about brain fog and having trouble with clarity and thinking and processing speed. I was trying to prepare for a TED talk, right? The 17-minute talk of your life. I could barely remember what I wanted to say. And this is supposed to be, from memory, no notes. I was in a pure panic because I couldn't absorb the information. So we left eventually with some fighting with a lawyer. Haven't gotten all of our money back, but moved back to the space that we had previously left. So 2 moves, some panic that my brain had suffered some permanent damage. And that's why I've been away from the podcast for a year and a half. So what I hope you learn from this story, from my story, is that if there are a bunch of random symptoms, or 1 or 2 random symptoms that you can't figure out the root cause of, if you feel better when you leave your house, that is a sign that something is up. And like I said earlier, mold does not always smell. Mold cannot always be seen. And if you have curiosity, you just want to know your baseline, I would suggest doing an ERMI. The dust test is the one that I used. I like it because you can click in each of the molds and see the health impacts, see the studies behind it. Yeah. So in my 8-week course, the Brain Health Blueprint, everybody gets a dust test because I think it's important to know the baseline of the space that you're in. Now, I've had clients whose current home is not a concern, but they still have issues. And when we test their body, they are harboring the mold. They have colonized the mold in their gut, in their nasal passages, but then it's much easier to take care of. Then we can just help them detox and clean out and kill the mold that's in them. But I think it's super helpful to know about your own space. So if you're interested, I will put the dust test link in the show notes. I am an affiliate with them. So I think I get like $20 if you order from that link. You don't have to use the dust test. There's another company called Envirobiomics. I often refer clients to them as well. But an ERMI can be a great screening tool. So that's one thing that I hope you learn from this. Second is pay attention to your instinct, right? I kept thinking it wasn't normal for my son to get constant bloody noses. Definitely wasn't normal for him to cry blood. I didn't even get into all the things, the reasons we were in the emergency room one night for my son because he was seeing halos and blurry, and don't all lights have a halo around them? No, he had a terrible reaction to a steroid eye drop that they had put him on from what they thought were allergies because his eyes were constantly red. They gave him steroid drops, and then he had a terrible reaction with very high ocular pressure, almost to the point of he could have gone blind. So many crazy stories. So I hope you learn from my experience to pay attention to these random set of symptoms. And again, if it's 1 or 2 or 3 out of 5 people in the house, it doesn't mean that those 1 or 2 or 3 people are crazy. It means that we all have different genetics. And you wouldn't call somebody crazy if they had a reaction to peanuts just because you don't have a reaction to peanuts, right? We're all different. So those are my takeaways for you. Yeah. So let me know in the comments what else you would like me to cover in future solo episodes that are easy to digest on your lunch break. Little snippets of information that can be helpful. So that's all for now. Have a great one. Talk to you again soon.